today. So we are good with that. Okay. All right, we are live.
Awesome. Well, TGIF, welcome to Friday and welcome to San Antonio Startup Week. My name is Liz Burt and I am proudly a track captain along with David Robinson Jr., who's going to jump on our call in a little bit. You know, in the day of technology and meetings being on Zoom, it only takes one to get backed up, but he will be joining us. Today's discussion is really about downtown adjacent neighborhoods and communities and how they speak to one another, how they can collaborate with one another, but also some of the challenges and opportunities that arise when you have multiple interests and users, but all working towards some really great connections. And I'll start with kind of an opening. I'll introduce our panelists and then we'll get right into the questions. So I work for CENTRO San Antonio, which oversees the Public Improvement District, which is 0.83 miles of the Central Business Improvement District in downtown. But we recognize downtown as greater downtown and flows over the freeways. But my question is, should we? What is downtown? It seems like there's a friendly disagreement between locals, visitors, so whether it's 410, 1604, or those in the heart of 7825, downtown's definition kind of varies on the perspectives of the individuals. And downtown is host to a wealth of cultural assets and human capital, but it lacks some residential density and retail. It's the greatest urban ecosystem with the San Antonio Riverwalk and with the San Pedro Creek coming online, but we kind of have a lack of open space right now. So who wouldn't want to embrace the Pearl and their magnificent green space and their ultimate metropolitan? I would want to claim Hemisfair, where children and families from all over San Antonio get to play and learn about different things. And of course, I'm always going to claim the missions and our history and our stories of origin from our south side and our west side and our east side and our north sides. I'll claim them all. And who wouldn't claim the great neighborhoods? So whether it's Government Hill, Tobin Hill, Lavaca, Southtown, King William, Denver Heights, Riverside, Lone Star, Highland Park, or even Avenida Guadalupe. But is it fair for me to assume so? How does downtown mutually benefit those users? And how do we create meaningful exchanges and connection with those neighborhoods and corridors? And specifically the ecosystems that are surrounding and intertwined in the center city. I am joined by, of course, a panel of local community thought leaders I believe to have inherent knowledge within and surrounding these topics. And I hope that through our conversation today, we can provide some vital insight on how we as creative collaborators, innovators, and place managers can break through silos and have impact for greater public good, especially amidst a pandemic when connection and sustainability are craved. So let me introduce our panel. First, we have Elizabeth, Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer for the Pearl. Next, we have Jeffrey. He's Director of Operations for Hemisfair Park Area Redevelopment Corps. And of course, Al Jr., President and CEO of the South San Antonio Chamber, which has its own soda, which I love. So let's get into it. I'm going to ask some questions and hopefully you guys will honor us with your candid answers and share and grow. So downtown, as defined by the Central Public Improvement District, is surrounded by major highways, including I-10, 90, 37, and 35. And for us, sometimes that creates a physical, but also a mental barrier between forging connections between downtown and those historic, beloved neighborhoods and neighbors. It also limits us in some of our abilities to deliver kind of those robust first impressions and those corridor experience that welcome different communities to the space they're entering. I'll start with you, Al. What have been some barriers you guys have experienced in your community, whether it's infrastructure, and how did you or how are you trying to overcome?
With respect to economic development in the backyard, as far as, things that we've been concerned about as a Chamber of Commerce, we've always identified public education as a cornerstone to our economic development. And we've also identified those gaps. And so I'm proud of the work that our organization has done. Change doesn't happen overnight, but you are seeing some of those school districts, especially in South Bexar County, that have really stepped up and been administratively accountable. The school boards are taking their roles more seriously. And I believe that seed was planted with us 5 years ago. We created an initiative called the Integrity of School Districts Initiative. We took legislation to the Capitol. I mean, we really were hitting home on points of accountability and transparency that we wanted to see. And so that was, I think, the biggest limitation that we know we needed to push through. But we certainly know that throughout the history, there's been this discussion of the two cities, the one south of 90 and one north of 90, and we do have, you know, some unfortunate infrastructure gaps that we need to maintain. There's some basic city services that folks are really still needing, and especially some of our businesses. And so I don't want to get too long-winded. There's challenges, and we know they're in our backyard, and we're willing to face them head on.
Awesome. Elizabeth, I'll go to you. You know, you have an interesting position as well. And before kind of the development of the Pearl, it was very industrial, really choked by the freeway. And you guys have done such a beautiful job of not only infilling, but embracing that. What are some challenges maybe that we didn't know that you overcame, or challenges that you're encountering now that you're trying to look towards?
You know, I think it's a really interesting time right now with not just what's happening at Pearl, but you kind of see radiating out with the plans on Broadway, you know, discussions about Brackenridge, just the neighborhoods, the historic neighborhoods all around us, having all of these nodes of energy and revitalization kind of coming together and or in a lot of ways organically addressing some of the challenges that you were bringing up about residential density, services, and having a small business economy that appeals to locals. You really see that happening. Of course, we have the opportunity to continue to push more density, and you know, for us, that's something that we are always thrilled to see, because something we've always talked about at Pearl is that we do not want Pearl to be some, you know, island that feels like a overmanaged development. The idea is that it's a neighborhood and it's porous, and so that the energy of the neighborhood pushes in and out. You know, we're really excited with the new project that's now coming online on Broadway with the Oxbow building and Credit Human moving their headquarters there, which, you know, thinking about some other major local businesses coming there, with the Alamo College's campus, the administrative campus there, and Jefferson Bank, and the Light, you know, finishing up. So it feels like some of the inherent challenges that we felt early on, where either people were kind of disoriented with the value proposition of Pearl, like, what's going on down there? I mean, I even remember before I started working there, I drove down and was like, what is this? Because when I went to Trinity in blah, blah, blah year, many years ago, it was like it was creepy down there when the brewery was closed. And I remember once I was coming back from Austin and my car ran out of gas on Casablanca and Broadway. And I was like, ooh, what are we going to do? Because there was nothing open. And so now to feel like we're at this kind of these levels where this is happening so consistently is very, very encouraging. And we just did a piece of research about what people in San Antonio are looking for, and how they want to spend their time. And, you know, what was also encouraging is that across the city, not just people living near downtown, but really across the city, the power of local, the power of unique and authentic things, and a desire for our city culture, regardless of whether I'm living, you know, up 1604 or right down in the center, for our distinct city characteristics not to be overwhelmed or erased by sometimes the anonymity of corporate progress, was pretty universally felt across the city. So I think that's also very encouraging as we think about what we're inventing together, not just one development or one neighborhood.
Yeah, and it's kind of eerie to me to even think back before, you know, Pearl. Like, it's like I don't remember it, right? It's made such a unique impact. I know that Geoff has been making impact, children and families from all over San Antonio visiting, but I imagine that, it didn't start that way. You had to build that community trust. Were there barriers, at the beginning? Are there barriers to the current projects that you're working on? What's going on over at Hemisfair?
I don't really see there were barriers in the true sense of the word. When we were formed as an organization by the city to revitalize what was the footprint of the 68 World's Fair, we reached out to citizens from all over San Antonio, to neighborhood communities, to organizations, and we said, what do you want to see? And we got their feedback and we got their vision, and we built Yanaguana Gardens because the city supported us and voted the bond election to give us the funds. And that gave us the community's trust. And then we had to do something with that. We had to make sure we delivered on that trust. So everything we do is with that in mind, that for us to succeed, we have to have the support of the city. We have to have support of all of San Antonio, which we've seen. We've had visits from all 10 districts. We've had all the populated zip codes have visited us at one point. And all our programming is with thoughtfulness of how do we make it inclusive for everybody. We've been doing that from day one. And how do we make it inexpensive or free? So 95% of our programming is free. And we're very, very proud of that, because we know that if we break that trust, they're not going to support us as we move forward with our other phases of Civic Park and Tower Park. And we've been working with the same focus groups and organizations to get that same level of feedback, so they feel there's a sense of ownership to what we're doing down here. And that gives them a reason to come downtown to visit us. And then in visiting us, they discover other pieces of downtown.
We appreciate that. We appreciate that. But it sounds like, the community trust was kind of a non-negotiable, especially given the origins, bond and civic kind of buy-in. Are there other non-negotiables, that you, Hemisfair, really try to keep in mind? Inclusiveness, I know. Thoughtfulness, I know for sure. Tracy from your team has a specific filter that I'm trying to be a lot more thoughtful of, and being inclusive in the ways of ADA and abilities and really stimulants that benefit all kinds of users. That seems to me to be such a poignant kind of stance on what you want that place to be. But are there other non-negotiables that, are inherent to kind of what you're trying to create and the space you're trying to create?
I think it's just more layers of the same. We knew it was important to create a safe environment. We knew it was important to create something that citizens would be proud of. So we worked very hard with the city and the Parks and Recreation Department and our own small staff to make sure that nothing stays broken. The occasional times we get a little tagging, which is very rare, that it disappears quickly. We listen, we take surveys, and we listen to the things that our visitors like. We listen to the things maybe they didn't enjoy as much. Now that we have residents down living at the 68 apartments, we're very cognizant of we're their backyard now. So we have to take care of that. As simple as a squeaky swing may not seem like a big deal unless it's 3 in the morning and somebody's sitting on that squeaky swing. And it's looking at all those pieces and making sure that we're constantly not resting on our laurels and say, well, we had that really good event and a lot of people came and it was from people from all over the city. So we don't need to worry so much today. Every day, you mentioned Tracy, all the programming pieces, the creating an actual inclusion programming for people with special needs, looking at all these different layers. What can we do? How do we do it? How do we partner with other organizations? It's great. The pandemic has given us a lot of opportunity, and one of them is we're working a lot with CENTRO, whereas before we knew each other, but we really didn't interact. And so I think taking advantage of those opportunities is critical.
Al, how about you? I'm interested because, we all know how hard it is to have progress while also kind of being thoughtful in preservation of stories of communities. You know, what are some non-negotiables for your organization and for you and your leadership in, you know, making sure that barriers, whether they're physical, emotional, or just in terms of what you want your community and chamber to become?
Sure. I think to echo a lot of what Geoff is that it does have to have engagement of the surrounding neighborhood, and even to Elizabeth's point about trying to get a broader buy-in to make, you know, the whole engine really build. I think what you're seeing that I've seen as, so to speak, non-negotiable, it is cultural, it is religious, and it is appropriate. You know, the World Heritage designation, that's an amazing thing. That's something we should be very proud of. And you think about the other World Heritage designations all over the world, and to be in line with those, like, you know, the Great Wall of China, the Statue of Liberty, these big, you know, world-known monuments, and we have one in our backyard, but literally it's in our backyard, and these folks are the parishioners of these churches. So as much as it's a World Heritage asset, it belongs to our community. And so the development around that needs to be sensitive to that. It also needs to be mindful of the stories that surround it, which many of these families still very much represent. And so, you know, where a lot of us might have, the South Side has been taken maybe for granted in the past, and you're seeing a resurgence from us, and everybody talks about, oh, is this the decade of the South Side, or is this the decade of the South Side? I think we've been living in it, and you're seeing us really come of age fast. But where I'm grateful maybe that those decades prior weren't our decades is what you're seeing, the kind of development that's happening across our city is very mindful of the historical context, telling a story, and the surrounding development that happens tries to blend to that fabric. And so you're seeing it now near the Mission Reach. Some new restaurants that want to develop their footprint looks similar to the Mission itself, the kind of brick they want to use, so again, I can't wait, and we're in it. I'd like to tell you, I think we're in the decade of the South Side, and some bigger things are going to come.
Awesome. Now, Elizabeth, I was fascinated by this. I did not know this, and I was kind of stalking you a little bit in preparation of this, but fifth generational San Antonian with some very significant tie-ins to the King William neighborhood. I love that I'm learning something new, and I hate to put you on the spot, but tell us a little bit about that, because I think for me that really connected kind of the thoughtfulness that I've known you to have and to be promoting at Pearl. But I think it's so special, and it should be shared with the world or shouted from a rooftop, if you don't mind.
Sure, yeah. So my mother's family is from San Antonio back to the first Spaniards that came here. And so I think in our with my grandmother, my great-grandparents, there's always been kind of that storytelling about our family being here. And my great uncle was Walter Mathis, who was one of the first people to go into King William in the early 60s, when the neighborhood had really declined, and a lot of those kind of the King William Street, those houses were actually like multifamily apartment units. And so he was early on with some other people. You know, Mike Casey has known him for now. My great uncle passed away, but you know, some very early people that were living in the neighborhood and working on preservation projects. He was early in the King William Association and the historic preservation organization. So I think growing up, you know, the first house I lived in was right on the corner of Beauregard and King William. And actually it was so neat. I was just walking down that street the other day and met the family that has moved into that house and
Wow.
Has just renovated it. It was actually sitting empty for years. And he was recruited to work at HEB from Portland. So it's a couple
Wow.
and their kids. Just so great to see life in that house. But I grew up across the street from my great uncle's house. That's now a national historic site. And so it's a museum now, the Villa Finale. And So I just grew up with that kind of always in the background, and this and the stories of San Antonio and the history of buildings and homes and neighborhoods, and that the importance of that just kind of from the time that I was a little kid, very present. And if I'm being totally honest, I never thought I would end up living in San Antonio as an adult, just because I went to Trinity and I thought, I'm going to go, I always wanted to travel. So I lived in Mexico City and I lived in Germany, and I was actually living in London during 9/11, which is what brought me back here and to reconnect, spend more time with my grandmother as she was getting older. And at that time she was still living in King William. And when I moved back, I just felt that calling and that connection to being a part of a community in a city that I had a stake in, versus being an outsider who was excited to participate in something that was so established, but that didn't call to me personally to say, well, what could I do here that would continue the legacy of commitment to our city and to the story that our city is writing. So I was kind of surprised that I felt like, oh, I actually want to stay here. And then I'm so thankful that I have, because what's happened in the last 20 years since I moved back has just been challenging, but also just continuously inspiring. And my grandmother passed away about 18 years ago. And I always wish that she could see what we were seeing now. She would say, "Isn't this wonderful?" She had that kind of accent, and so did my great uncle. "Isn't this marvelous?" So I think she would give San Antonio a big, loud, wonderful approval if she could see what's going on. She would love, Geoff, she would just have loved to see Hemisfair and see the UNESCO designation and Pearl, but I kind of hope she's looking down on us, giving us
I
her
think she
approval.
is. On this beautiful fall day, who wouldn't be
Yeah,
looking down
yeah.
and smiling at San Antonio?
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing. Again, I know that went a little rogue, but when I read it, I was like, how did I not know this? And I felt, again, compelled to learn a little bit more, because, again, you've done such an incredible job of I think, balancing both kind of forward progress with preservation. And that kind of segues into my next question, which is kind of the hard, I think, part of San Antonio. If I had to kind of find an issue that people are divided, but from good places come from, is, we have these dynamic ecosystems and human capital, but how do we balance, and honor the stories of origin with creative entrepreneurship and innovation that is sustainable for the locals and visitors and translates and all the people that we want to attract and keep? So Al, how are you guys finding ways to kind of specifically honor that heritage, honor that story, but also, again, driving that ecosystem that's going to benefit the neighborhood and community? I know you spoke a little bit about, obviously, the missions, but I've been beaming with pride with kind of the progress and some of the things I'm seeing, but what else can we look forward to, and how has that been?
I think something that San Antonio's, where I think getting a lot better about is a sense of our own story and telling them truly through and through. And so where I'm going with this is there's still ways to innovate in spaces like cybersecurity and healthcare and aerospace. But you also have to think that the point in time where a lot of that started was in San Antonio, at Brooks, aerospace technology, doing testing for moon landings. I mean, you name it, we've been innovating here, and we're going to continue to do that. So there's a way to tell that broader story that we're still doing what we've been doing for decades, but now obviously in these more unique spaces that are ever evolving, ever faster. We had a luncheon yesterday with Congressman Hurd, and he alluded to what we saw in technology the previous 40 years. The next 10 are gonna pale that completely. And so, there is still innovative, new entrepreneurial spaces to find yourself and not necessarily be limited by a history, but and you can still tell your own story. But there's still a lot of similarities, if you will.
Yeah. And Geoff, Yanaguana, I mean, you guys have been, again, thoughtful in history and stories, specifically to our indigenous groups, but yet you're infilling historic homes. So I imagine that's got to be perplexing at times, but, how do you guys balance those kind of spectrums and needs?
Well, I think it starts with, as you said, we call it Yanaguana. That means spirit waters, from the Paia Indians who were here. They were the first people here. And we honor them and their culture and their history through the 3 art pieces that we have in the park that were done by Oscar Alvarado that tell their creation story of the Blue Panther. And along with that, we look at the other pieces of the history of San Antonio. We have, the 68 World's Fair, but we also have the homes that were before the 68 World's Fair. And we look at all those layers and we want to honor those layers, but also look moving forward. How do we encourage today to make sure that they want to visit the park and tell the story of whether it was last year or 5 decades ago or 250 years ago, and try to put it in a package that makes sense. And I think we've done a really good job because we've got the layers of art and the layers of history. We have a representation of the acequia that was here before us, that was used by both some of the early Indians or the Native Americans and then the Spanish settlers. And then as San Antonio grew, that was how they moved water from point A to point B. And when they do a lot of construction, they find remains of that acequia all over the city. So we do all those layers to try to pay homage to the history, but also look forward to what we can do to bring people downtown and all groups and all classes and just make it the place where San Antonio meets. That's really, we're serious when we say that we're the place San Antonio meets. We joke about it being pre-K to gray, in that we want to have something here that everybody might want to do, whether you're a child or you have children or you don't have children. We just want to be a space for everybody, be it entrepreneurs with small businesses that we try to find into our historic homes, or the big development pieces that we do that will help fund our parks so we can become self-sufficient. It's a variety of layers and opportunities that I'm excited and honored to be part of it. Really, really am.
And Elizabeth, you guys, I mean, you've had royalty from Spain. I mean, you've had such exciting things going on there programmatically. But what I really value is the programming that you guys are really thoughtful in tuning into the traditions and the celebrations, and also finding kind of interesting ways, eclectic ways to kind of amplify them or create them in new and dynamic ways. So whether it's, celebrating Dia de los Muertos, farmers markets, there's just so much going on there. How are you guys really trying to bring in that culinary entrepreneurship, which I know you do with your businesses, but how programmatically does that work, and how exciting is that? I mean, how do you really, how did you come up with what programming that could be celebrated, both past and new, in terms of Pearl in the space?
Well, we're at an interesting moment right now. I mean, everybody is, in terms of programming with COVID. So like most people, we have suspended all of our major programming this year. And what that's been, it's been an interesting process thinking about how do we create continuity for what really the heart of that programming is, which is connecting with our broader community, to celebrate together in ways that are meaningful specifically to San Antonio, sort of by and for our San Antonio community, which is really what Dia was all about, because we would work with lots of different artists representing a broad spectrum of San Antonio traditions and neighborhoods, and invite the broadest part of San Antonio to Pearl to celebrate together and either honor a tradition that you're familiar with or learn about it. And so now we're really thinking about, how do we connect digitally and through content. So something that we've actually done this year is launched a content studio specifically for our tenants, which is comprised, of a community of small businesses. So, we have 19 restaurants and 14 retailers, all of whom are unique to San Antonio and run by individual people. And so as we've tried to figure out how do we create kind of what I call the nest of support during COVID, content and developing a digital conversation with your customer and equipping and encouraging people to tell their stories, their human stories during this has shown up as very important. And it's given us a window through which we can kind of think about evolving some of this programming so that instead of it being ephemeral, it's just one day. It's like, how do we really create a space that can be interacted with over a longer period of time that invites an even broader spectrum of voices and connects specifically to the stories of the individual people that are involved in Pearl. So that's been one thing we've been certainly working on. So like for DIA, we're working with SASW, we're doing a community altar, but it's digital. There will be a presence on site, but hopefully it will be a way for even more people to be involved. And our farmers market, I think probably you guys all know this, but we did launch our farmers market curbside online. So we have now more than 80 vendors in that channel. And so we've actually brought the farmers market back in person, but the digital channel has proved to be so successful and dynamic and really helped to stabilize a lot of our producers and market that we're going to continue with it. And so this is just a time, I think, I hate to say anything about a silver lining because this has been such a challenging and heartbreaking time for so many people. But I think when things collapse, it does give you the challenge of reinvention and the evaluation of the way that you've been doing things and a charge to say what's not consequential, what's not essential, what's not important, or what's just rote, and what can we evolve and change to be even more powerful in our commitment to what we're trying to do.
That's awesome. And thank you for, being candid. I mean, pandemic talks are not easy. And I think especially for those of us on the call where we're not just in charge of a private space, right? It's public realm that's really under attack with this pandemic, and community trust is what we have to build back in order for people to travel outside their bubble and their neighborhood. And so I totally value that. I'm a mass gatherer, so I'm prohibited, but I value the way that you've been able to support and amplify the individual business stories. So that way they can continue talking, but also that you're reevaluating and seeing, wow, is this an arm that we can develop and move? I think all of us have to remain flexible and nimble at the drop of the dime with the way the ebbs and flows are going. So thank you for that. With that, we know San Antonio is economically segregated. And although there are pockets of poverty in many areas around the city, the worst poverty, unemployment, and education outcomes are concentrated in 4 zip codes. 2 zip codes along the Near East Side where myself and our championship San Antonio Spurs call home. 1 zip code in the Southwest metro area, and then 78207, which is intimately west of downtown and embodies some of Zona Cultural District. We've broached on it in a couple ways, and you guys have already mentioned a couple of ways that you're doing that, whether it's free programming and really engagement. But how do we and how do you kind of foster shared ownership while also kind of creating a brave space for the community and stakeholders to either overcome historical, social, economic division and inequality, and this can be before, during, post-COVID, but it really boils down to how do you balance the needs of the users and those socioeconomic backgrounds. Al, I'd love to start with you. You mentioned it a bit, and I think you guys have been very thoughtful in understanding who the residents are, or as you said, the parishioners, which I love. I love it. Sounds more emotional and engaging, but how are you finding balancing the needs, especially with the socioeconomic backgrounds during this time?
Our chamber's been around since 1982, and we've been very cognizant of a lot of these issues that we're discussing today. And honestly, that this pandemic has kind of busted wide open, and we've been very, very mindful of those. Where, I'll say to the spirit of our organization is, we're a membership-based organization. And so I truly represent folks that have a civic mind, they get engaged, they see the value, and together we get a lot of things done together. Where we were cognizant, though, of is we also do realize that a lot of these small businesses just aren't chamber members. They've been difficult to connect with for different reasons, whether it's digital divide or just too busy in their own, business, or just basically the chamber membership means a light bill to some. And so it's a different, I guess, backyard that we're trying to negotiate our value as a chamber. But where I'm going with this is, we knew as a chamber that there were development entities that could help small businesses that weren't members. And you saw that on the west side with West Side Development Corp. And you see that now on the east side with Sage, with San Antonio Grow, the east side. And we wanted our own, and we set out to get our own. And so through our foundation, we created Southside First, which is now kind of hybrid government agency with the city of San Antonio that is providing small business resources for chamber members and non-chamber members alike on the south side. And we thought that was a big gap. We saw basically no business programming for entrepreneurs or small businesses that just needed some basics to get going. And where I'll close on this with COVID too, this is essentially why we knew such a service was necessary. Throughout this CARES Act funding and grant processes, everything called for documentation, called for record keeping, called for things that, again, these seminars, these programmings that we're putting on, those were the tools to equip you into this year if you had them. And so, I wish we could have touched more, especially those that we saw were very, very badly affected by it. But to that point, though, and I'll brag about those other partners like Westside Development and Sage, there are those organizations that are out there that are doing this work and helping entrepreneurs get their foot in the door. And XYZ challenges are different a little bit in every pocket, but those organizations are certainly helpful.
And Elizabeth, how about you guys? I mean, the Pearl has created this persona that for some, it's I can go there, walk my dog, I can be in my pajamas, but for others, they may not necessarily know that they're welcome, or know that they can go there and just sit on the lawn. Like, how do you balance kind of this really innovative culinary scene with kind of the basic needs of just a public space? You guys seem to have a good formula, so.
I mean, it's certainly something that we are in a mode of listening, and that we take very seriously and talk about a lot, is that, how do you create space that we treat our public spaces truly like public spaces. Actually, during COVID, we aligned our park, the way that we managed our parks with the way that the city was managing their parks. So if a city park was closed over a holiday weekend to try and reduce gathering, we would do the same. We don't close our parks. There's no hours on them. And we're actually in the process of pulling out some surface parking and replacing it with an additional park that will be over by where Green is, as we commit to the value of green space and the value of public space. I think that sometimes with restaurants that have a reputation of being, this is a foodie place, or this is a lot of people could feel like, well, I don't know if that's for me. And so I think for us, it's been really important to draw from the diversity of our community. So the food hall, the idea of the food hall is it really is an incubator that invites different operators to come in at a very, very low risk. And be present, and if we're doing it right, that it's a representation of different members of our community. So having a woman-run business like Tenco with Jen Dobbs and Quayle, and then this year having Mi Roti come in with Chef Nicola, which has been an incredible, and to see the response of the community to Mi Roti and to Chef Nicola and her team has been incredible. We just opened, I think it's only been, time is so weird during COVID, right? I think it's only been 2 weeks since Chilaquil opened, and they had previously been a food truck, and now they're in the food hall. And Orlando and his team are incredible. And that style of Mexico City and Northern Mexican chilaquiles and tacos, and just seeing the response of that was definitely a missing for us to be a place where you can easily grab a taco, right, at Pearl. Which is kind of our lingua franca of San Antonio. But the idea that we're going to welcome and invite entrepreneurs and members of the culinary community that are themselves diverse is essential, because that's the importance of representation. You know, you can say all you want, women are welcome, but if there's no women sitting at the table in leadership positions, or there's no female chefs, then that doesn't feel right. If you say, oh, you know, we represent the broad diversity of community of the San Antonio, but the operators and the owners aren't diverse, then that doesn't feel authentic. So having authentic diversity is an invitation for authentic diversity. And we're not saying that we've got it figured out, but I think a commitment to that and being open to listening, which is, to me, that's the mantra that I've been saying a lot to my team, is over the course of this year, there's been so many poignant moments where, you know, to myself, I've just kind of said, shut up and listen to what's being said in ways that maybe I've heard in my life, but maybe not fully. And so as we think about a space that even we hope will be used publicly, that practice is more important now, I think, than ever before.
Awesome. And Geoff, you know, we touched about Tracy and some of the inclusivity and diversity, but I'd really like you to maybe elaborate a little bit more on that, because I know for me, you know, it was really eye-opening. You know, we have Morgan's Wonderland that is really being a champion locally, and I've really, it's really opened my eyes on all abilities, and really making downtown and some of the places that I thought were accessible even more accessible. So whether it's adult size, you know, changing tables, or just stimulus lighting and sensory activations that are thoughtful to, again, all aptitudes and abilities. Can you explore that a little bit more? Just because I think you guys have taken it to a next level, and a lot of us could gain valuable insight from you.
Well, we are blessed with a wonderfully designed park. From the beginning, it was designed to be accessible. It has elements that can be used by not just young people, but even adults with special needs, and have access if you have mobility impairment. And we're in a unique position because having Tracy as our director of programming, and she has a special needs child. So it is very important to her, and she sees it in a way that the rest of us can't. We can be sympathetic to it, and we can, I think, understand it intellectually, but if you're not dealing with something like that every waking moment, you don't truly understand the value that the little things are. And so we were trying to, in our normal day-to-day programming, to be aware of that, and if we had opportunities to enhance what we had, like as simple as we have a digger that's in our sand play area that is designed for somebody in a wheelchair to be able to roll up and use, as opposed to just a digger that's in the middle of the sand play area. But then when Tracy came up with the idea of how do we create something that tells the residents in San Antonio that are special needs, whether it's a special needs child or you might have an adult that's special needs, to make them feel comfortable to come out into a public space and know that you don't have to worry about where you're going to park, that there's ample parking. You don't have to worry about accessibility. You don't have to worry about, you know, possibly needing an adult-sized changing table. And then while you're here, there's going to be all kinds of activities that you and your special needs family member can do, but also interacting with members of the community so that it is a mix. It's not an isolation, say, well, you know, you've got a disability, so you go over here and play. We don't want you to mix with anybody else. That's not what we wanted. The vision was to create something where somebody with special needs feels comfortable coming, but then just our regular visitors feel comfortable as well, because some of the activities are things they can do, and then their children can interact with children that are in a wheelchair, or maybe hearing impaired, or whatever the disability, and it becomes more normal. So they become more part of the community, and then as they grow up, that feeling grows with them, which makes it easier to be inclusive for you as you grow up to be a young adult or an adult, to no longer look at somebody in a wheelchair as what's wrong with them, or somebody that stutters, or whatever the problem is. And so everything leading up to that, we were trying to create that inclusive ideas. Is we want people to come, we want it to be inexpensive, we want it to be welcoming, we want it to be safe. But with this added element, dimension, we now look at everything just a little bit differently. Even with some of the third-party events, when we've done Diwali Fest and Luminaria, we look at, okay, you know, is there going to be access for wheelchairs? What about some of these activities you're going to do? How can we incorporate making that a little more inclusive or available? And all our partners have been great with understanding that and helping us some of these events out to communities that before might have felt a little isolated. And it's really exciting when you see some of the visitors that are special needs playing in the park, and you talk to a parent or a caregiver. It's just so heartwarming to hear that this is the first time their child has felt comfortable, or they have an older special needs person and they're able to sit on a swing, and you find out they're 30 years old, they've never been on a swing. And it was free. And so it's an amazing journey that we've been on, and we're waiting very anxiously for this whole pandemic thing to be over so we can get back to some of these great programs that we were doing and invite San Antonians back to downtown without any fear.
Thank you, Geoff, and thank you to Tracy too. Tracy would have joined us, but there was a conflict, and again, I know this story, but I appreciate it so much hearing it from you. I actually was mentioning a couple of days ago that the thing I miss the most, because I was asked, what do you miss most, you know, about kind of the situation right now? What are the kind of the sights and sounds you miss? And I miss laughter at Hemisfair. I miss laughter at Yanaguana on the playground. So I'm with you on that. You know, kind of in closing, we have a couple minutes left. You know, as practitioners and makers and guardians of place and community, I think what we've learned today is that by listening and learning, and with thoughtful and genuine and consistent engagement, as well as honest and earnest embracing of past, present, and future, can really lead to prosperity and cohesions for the greater downtown network, including amongst my esteemed colleagues. But I'm going to flip the question, and I'm gonna be selfish and ask, how can downtown be a better partner in creating more opportunities to connect and reinforce connections to the users, the communities, and the visitors that you guys welcome? How can we as downtown be more thoughtful, be wildly collaborative, and how can we really help maybe some of the opportunities or challenges or barriers that are kind of taking place in the communities that are sometimes defined as in downtown and sometimes not? Al, how can I be a better neighbor? How can we be a better neighbor?
Man, if I'm going to be honest with you, Elizabeth, I think it's the other way around. We know the impact that has happened in downtown in the core. I've been of the personal perspective that we need to do more to boost the economy downtown. We kind of took it for granted this year, so to speak, and we're realizing how important it is. And for me, there's a lot of conversation that, we obviously want to upskill our folks, but folks start somewhere. I know I started selling shoes at my mall, and I know that downtown is a great source of jobs for young folks that are just looking for some wages, some supplemental wages, so to speak, and for folks that need employment, period. And so I think downtown has been nothing but great. It's time for us to kind of flip the lens a little bit and see what we can do to help downtown right now, especially that we knew hurt because of COVID.
I appreciate that, Al.
Yeah,
yes,
I'm
okay.
I'm keeping it real. I'm keeping it real.
Elizabeth, how can I be a better neighbor? Do you need some sugar? What do you need? How can I help?
Send me some sugar. I think that the what you introduced in your first comment about what is downtown, you know, and I've spent some time with talking with CENTRO and with the Economic Development Group, kind of thinking about our San Antonio brand. And, you know, I think downtown, my feeling is that the more that kind of generous or fluid our definition of downtown is, the more powerful it is, in that it's really a civic structure that allows people to come together, that and moments of diversity, cultural diversity, economic diversity, stage of life diversity. You know, I think that's one of the things that we don't talk enough about. You know, I'd mentioned being close to my grandmother, and I think being around different stages of life together is so generative and important. And if you think about great cities with lots of kind of concentric neighborhoods that make, you know, a 6-year-old, so I was thinking of puzzles and shapes, you know, kind of make a honeycomb of neighborhoods where there's lots of relatedness, that I think that the more that we hold each other accountable to having relatedness, so that there's not canyons that divide us, you know, whether it's this street is completely inaccessible to pedestrians, or this place feels so dangerous or reputationally is so dangerous that it stands as a block, or this place is not welcoming, that we hold each other accountable in those ways and encourage the connectedness, human connectedness, that is what invigorates the concept of downtown and actually makes it real. And, you know, Geoff, something you said that I think about a lot, because I just see it at Pearl when we do this, and I see it at Yanaguana, and I see it, you know, in cities anywhere you go, is it's so much harder to hold people in negative stereotype if you're around people. And that is one of the great benefits of just the fundamental concept of a city. And so I think that as much as we can hold ourselves and celebrate the unique identities of our neighborhood, which is what makes our city, you know, all the stories and everything that makes our city truly unique, which is a treasure, I think we also hold the relatedness that we have, and what we carry together. And that's one of the things that has been, hopefully for a lot of people, an insight and a bit of, and kind of what I call moments of grace during COVID, where we realize we're carrying something common together that can affect all of us in the same way or a similar way, which is very intimate. And so, you know, I love the idea of just saying, hey, what can I do for you? What can I do for you? And just ongoingly hold each other accountable in relationship.
I love that. And Geoff's going to get the final word, because he always does. And it's Friday, his favorite day.
You know, when I started working downtown, I've been working with Hemisfair about 5 years. I was probably a very typical San Antonian. First of all, my background is theme parks. I've worked for almost 40 years with SeaWorld. And so I was very tourist focused. That's what was important. And local visits to a theme park are very important, but where the money is, the people that tend to spend more money in a theme park come from somewhere other than your hometown. And so I looked at downtown the way I think a lot of San Antonians did. It's where the tourists go. They go to the tower, they go to the Riverwalk, they go to the Alamo, and I don't want to do that. Well, when I started working down here, I immediately discovered there's way much more to downtown than just that. And I think people intellectually know that. But I really think in the last 5 years, downtown has been, whether it's been on purpose or by accident through evolution, but really telling their story so that San Antonians start to recognize downtown is a treasure with so many opportunities and so many activities. And as you said in the beginning, downtown is not necessarily the core. Downtown is the core, and the ripples and the layers that go out from downtown. And I really think San Antonians are starting to realize there's something very special in San Antonio. And it's not just the Riverwalk, although the Riverwalk is amazing and the tower is amazing, the Alamo's great, but there are so many other layers and so many other things, so many small businesses. That was one of the things that amazed me when I started just wandering around through Southtown and the portions of downtown I didn't normally visit, but now that I was working downtown, I felt like I needed to explore. And I was just amazed at all the different things. And at Pearl, there's Pearl, but then there's layers that surround Pearl that are, you know, there's just so many things. And I think, you know, Liz, CENTRO has been doing a really good job trying to get that word out, and all the different organizations. I think that's getting our locals to recognize what an amazing thing downtown is and all the layers that it represents. And it's something for everybody. There's free opportunities. There's certainly inexpensive. There's small business opportunities. There's things for all walks of life. And I think now the story's being better told than it was once.
Oh, well, I appreciate that shout out. Shout out CENTRO, my employer. Well, thank you all. If I'm being candid, you guys are really making our jobs easy by creating places that people love, that they can celebrate, right? And downtown is a challenging place, you know, it's where we celebrate the Spurs, it's where we fiesta, but it's also where we mourn, where we have peaceful procession, where, you know, we have some challenging discussions, but if anything has arisen from this pandemic, it's that there is radical compassion, and there's a radical desire to collaborate for sustainable outcomes that we want to make better for not just the visitors, but really for those hyper locals and our local community. I hope that the Startup Week conference goers can relate to and connect to some of the common themes that, as innovators, makers, and leaders of the urban core and communities, we're often expected to fix or kind of overcome, whether it's development, retail, transportation, connectivity, density, authenticity, sustainability. On top of all of that, a pandemic, but I know that I am not alone in wishing all of you watching and my esteemed panelists health and happiness, and of course a restful weekend. Don't be a stranger, right? Elizabeth, you need that sugar. Al, you need to come down here. Jeff's already here all the time.
I'll be there Sunday on the kayak.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, see,
good.
there's some cool things to take advantage of right now. Yeah.
There's some awesome things, but I appreciate your time, and we're gonna say farewell. But thank you everybody for tuning in. Thank you to my panelists,
Thanks,
and
Liz.
thank you Startup Week.
Thanks, guys. Bye.